Hello, this is Mr. Ammerman, and we're now in the midst of our culture unit. And the second stage of our understanding of cultures is understanding language. And one of the basis of us understanding language really well is language. And when we think of the language tree, we think of what kind of languages people speak around the world. And it's one of the things that makes us us. It's one of those puzzle pieces that makes us the person that we are, or the people that we are. And so let's dive in to look at a little bit of the history of the language tree. As you can see on this map, there are lots and lots of different languages spoken throughout the world. And whether you're in the biggest group, Indo European, or Sino Tibetan, which is the second largest language family in the world, we're going to continue taking a look at these in the form that you're going to be required to know, which is the actual language tree. And it looks like a tree, and you'll see it in just a moment. There you go. So on the left-hand side of the screen, you have what is seen as the Sino-Tibetan. On the right, or about two-thirds of the way on the right, you see what's Indo-European. So those are the two biggest language families that we're going to be talking about here today. So a language family is simply a collection of languages related to each other through a common ancestor long before recorded history. So what that means is, in reality, our languages, for the most part, came from the same roots. They came from the same ancestors. They've just evolved and changed throughout the years, depending on where you lived. And the less and less interaction you had, the more and more your languages changed and evolved. So we have all these different languages around the world simply because these people for years were isolated by their geography, and those languages simply just evolved in different words, had different meanings, and you had different sounds. And as time progressed, they just became their own individual languages. But language family, the ancestor, the great, 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 great grandparent of these languages. And you can see we're going to use the Indo-European language family as our example. You can see right here, the Indo-European language family is the largest language family with over 2.7 billion speakers. And if you would go up that tree trunk, all of those languages are part of the Indo-European language family. So English and Spanish and Hindi and Russian and Portuguese and French, they're all related. They're distant cousins, they're all related. So the tree trunk there is your language family. The second largest language family in the world, over on the left-hand side, is the Sino-Tibetan language family. Then we have a language branch. Now, this is where the languages are related through a common ancestor that existed several thousand years ago. Now, the differences are not as specific. So there are some similarities. So for instance, you can go to a family reunion and maybe your branch of the family has some cousins that look very similar. Same thing here. The differences are not as extensive as the old ones. And they can actually prove that these branches came from the same family. So for instance, we have the Germanic branch. English is part of the Germanic branch of the Indo-European language family. You can see that the Germanic branch is different than the Romantic branch. The Romantic language branch is probably the most famous language branch in the world because the Romantic language branch has Portuguese, French, and Spanish as their languages. So if you take French class or you take Spanish class, you'll often notice that some words are very similar because they're related. Let me give you an example of even going back further to language family. In Russian, library is biblioteka. And if you know other languages, you know that sounds pretty familiar to some other languages around the world. So we'll use the Indo-European language family, and the branch is Germanic, just like Romantic, just like Balto-Slavic, just like Indo-Iranian that you see here in this video. The last one we'll take a look at is language group, collection of languages within a branch that share a common origin in the relatively recent past and display relatively few differences in grammar and vocabulary. In the case that we're going to use is West Germanic, and you can see here that little grouping shoots off of the Germanic branch and becomes the West Germanic branch, where you then have German and you have English. So German and English are pretty tightly related. And you would think that English and Spanish and French would be more related, but actually English and German are more related when we go back through our ancestors. So look at the language tree again. We have the Indo-European language family, and then the Germanic language branch, and then the West Germanic language group. The largest language in the world, this is just some random trivia for you as you can see the screen in front of you, is that the largest language in the world in terms of native speakers is Mandarin. So when we say native speakers, we're talking about the first words they speak are in that language. So for instance, Mandarin is number one, followed by Hindi, then English. But if we want to talk about the largest, most prevalent language spoken in the world today, that is English. I may ask you a question on a quiz at some point. The largest language family in South America is Indo-European. The largest language branch in South America is Romantic because Spanish and Portuguese. Most Brazilians speak Portuguese. So those are some of the things that are some of the basics that we want to remember regarding language and how they're interconnected. And that kind of gives us an understanding of why some words are similar around the world because, in fact, they're actually related. See you next time.